Japan was not a totally locked box for 250 years, but most ordinary people still lived inside a tightly controlled world. Trade and diplomacy never vanished completely, and contact survived through places like Nagasaki, Tsushima, the Ryukyu Kingdom, and the northern frontier. Most villagers never felt much of that small outside contact in their daily lives. Their world was the rice field, the market town, the temple register, the tax season, and family duty. That is what life under Tokugawa isolation really felt like from the ground. If you were a farmer, sunrise came early and comfort was never guaranteed. Homes were modest, often built from wood, earth, straw, and paper, which made fire a constant danger. Winter could be bitter, depending on the region, and families owned very little by modern standards. Rice was precious, but many peasants did not eat polished white rice every day. Meals often included millet, barley, beans, radish, greens, miso, and whatever fish or gathered food was available. A bad harvest was not a small problem. It could mean debt, hunger, selling belongings, pressure to move, and sometimes death. Tokugawa Japan is remembered for peace, and compared with the civil wars before it, that is true. But peace did not mean life was easy. Armies stopped tearing through the land, yet taxes, rank, famine, and strict discipline remained very real. The government watched common people through records, local responsibility, and temples more than through modern police. Families had to register through Buddhist temples, partly to show they were not Christians. That meant religion and paperwork were tied together in daily life. Your identity, where you lived, and even your death rights sat inside a monitored system. The shogunate did not need every farmer to meet a foreigner to make isolation powerful. It only needed people to stay legible, rooted, and easy to track. Status rules shaped nearly everything a person could do. People often describe society as warriors, farmers, artisans, and merchants, though real life was messier than that. Samurai officially stood at the top, but many were poor and deeply in debt. Merchants officially ranked low, yet city merchants often held serious wealth. Farmers were praised because they produced food, but they carried heavy tax burdens. Artisans kept urban life running by making and repairing the things everyone used. Outside this neat ladder were outcast communities and other marginalized people facing severe discrimination. So isolation was not only about keeping outsiders out. It was also about sorting people inside Japan into strict social boxes. The shogunate ruled through regional lords called daimyo, and those lords were controlled too. Under Sankin Kotai, the alternate attendant system, daimyo had to keep homes in Edo and spend time there. Their families were effectively kept under shogunal watch, which reduced the chance of rebellion. For ordinary people, this meant busy roads, official processions, and labor tied to infrastructure. It also drained domain finances, because those grand journeys were expensive political theater. And when domains needed money, commoners often felt the pressure through taxes and extra demands. Travel inside Japan existed, but it was tightly regulated and would feel suffocating to modern people. Checkpoints mattered, official permission mattered, and leaving your assigned place could bring punishment. Overseas travel was banned for ordinary Japanese, and even returning from abroad was forbidden. The state feared smuggling, piracy, Christianity, and independent power outside its control. That big political fear became an everyday culture of limits for normal people. Most people lived and died without seeing a foreigner or boarding an ocean-going ship. Most also never had a real chance to choose a totally different life path. Still, isolation-era life was not dull or empty. One of the strangest parts of Tokugawa Japan is how controlled it was and how lively it was at the same time. Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto were full of trade, work, entertainment, and fast-moving city culture. Edo itself grew into one of the largest cities in the world, often estimated at around 1 million people. In those cities you could find booklenders, publishers, bathhouses, tea houses, restaurants, peddlers, and performers. There were craftsmen, money handlers, and a huge service economy feeding daily urban life. Woodblock prints, kabuki plays, sumo, popular fiction, and seasonal festivals gave townspeople rich entertainment. The pleasure quarters also shaped taste, fashion, and dreams, even inside a tightly controlled society. That means life felt split in two directions at once. Rules controlled dress, weapons, travel, residence, and public rank. Yet people still chased style, good food, humor, trends, and small moments of escape. Authorities even kept issuing sumptuary laws, which were rules against flashy spending. Those laws only existed because people were actually trying to show wealth and taste. In other words, ambition kept pushing upward even while law pushed downward. Samurai life was also far less romantic than movie versions suggest. During long peace, many samurai were not warriors in battle but clerks, guards, scholars, and administrators. Some treated that role as a serious moral duty. Others struggled with fixed stipends, debt, and the feeling that merchants handled the real cash. The famous ideal of Bushido sharpened in peacetime partly because a warrior class needed a new purpose. So a low-ranking samurai might spend more time doing paperwork than swinging a sword. Women's lives changed a lot depending on class, place, and household needs. Elite women could influence family management and domain connections, but strong patriarchal rules still framed their world. Merchant women often worked inside family businesses and helped keep money flowing. Peasant women did hard farm work and heavy domestic labor alongside childcare. Marriage, inheritance, and service work were usually shaped by family continuity more than personal choice. The household, not the independent individual, was the basic building block of society. Children entered that world early. They played, but they also worked young and learned duty fast. Education depended on class and place, yet late Tokugawa Japan had surprisingly broad literacy for a pre-modern society. Scholars debate the exact numbers, but many agree town literacy and numeracy were notably strong. Temple schools and private academies helped commoners learn reading, writing, counting, and practical skills. That mattered because print culture was growing right alongside city commerce. So the so-called isolated country was also a reading country in many places. Religion touched daily life in ways modern people often separate from government. Buddhism, Shinto practice, Confucian ideas, local ritual, and folk belief all overlapped. Families marked seasons, funerals, births, and festivals through these shared customs. But after anti-Christian crackdowns, religion was also a tool of control. Hidden Christians survived in some regions by disguising beliefs and rituals, showing control was strong but not total. Food and work followed the seasons with almost no break from nature's demands. Rice planting and harvest shaped village calendars, while fishing communities followed the sea. In towns, diet depended on price, supply, and status expectations as much as personal taste. Famines were one of the hardest facts of life under Tokugawa rule. The Tenmei and Tenpo famines devastated communities and deepened debt, migration, and unrest. Peace at the level of national politics could not protect people from weather, crop failure, or corrupt local officials. Isolation also changed how people imagined the world beyond their door. Educated people knew of China, Korea, the Dutch, and wider lands through filtered knowledge. Maps existed, and some scholars studied foreign medicine, astronomy, geography, and technology through Dutch learning. Domestic trade also kept expanding, roads improved, castle towns grew, and cash use spread across the country. But for the average villager, foreignness was not an everyday experience. A person from another domain or another status group might feel more outside than a European ever would. A woman in a farming village met the state through taxes and temple records, not through border drama. A man in Edo often knew more about polite rank and business manners than about distant countries. That is why the word isolation can be misleading if you picture only closed ports. The stronger reality was disciplined containment inside everyday life. You were born into a place, a status, a set of duties, and a world rulers wanted to stay predictable. Yet inside that narrow frame, people still laughed at kabuki, soaked in bathhouses, bought cheap prints, and gossiped about prices. They prayed at shrines, joined festivals, and found pleasure in food, fashion, and local culture. Even the word Sakoku can hide the human scale of the period. For rulers, it meant controlled borders and controlled channels. For commoners, it often meant controlled movement, controlled identity, and controlled ambition. A farmer did not wake up thinking about grand foreign policy. That farmer woke up thinking about weather, taxes, tools, and whether the harvest would hold. Because villages were tied to mutual responsibility systems, neighbors also watched neighbors. One household's trouble could become everyone else's trouble in the eyes of authorities. That kind of social surveillance made order feel personal, not distant. Temple registration did the same thing. It was not only religious routine, it was part of the paperwork that proved who you were and where you belonged. That is a very different kind of state power than modern passports, but it could still feel tight. The same is true of roads and checkpoints. Travel did happen for work, duty, pilgrimages, and official movement, yet freedom of movement was never assumed. When great daimyo processions passed, ordinary people saw the power of rank moving right in front of them. They also saw the cost, because all that ceremony drew resources out of the countryside. City life showed another face of the age. Edo's scale meant huge demand for food, labor, entertainment, transport, and services. That demand helped merchants and artisans grow stronger even while official ideology ranked them below samurai and farmers. The result was a society where status and money did not always point in the same direction. That mismatch shaped daily tension everywhere. A poor samurai could outrank a rich merchant on paper and still envy the merchant's cash. A merchant family could look socially low and still live inside a world of trade, fashion, and credit. That is one reason sumptuary laws kept appearing. The state could see wealth moving in directions its moral ranking system did not fully like. Women's work shows the same practical complexity. Class ideals mattered, but households still needed labor, bookkeeping, childcare, and commercial skill. So women's daily influence could be larger than simple legal rank makes it seem. Children's education also reveals that isolation did not mean stagnation. Temple schools and private schools helped create readers for a growing print market. A society with booklenders and popular fiction was not frozen in place, even when its borders were tightly managed. Filtered knowledge from the Dutch proves the point even more. Elite and semi-elite scholars still studied medicine, astronomy, geography, and technology from Europe through narrow channels. So Japan was not asleep. It was selective. Knowledge came in through carefully watched doors instead of wide-open gates. That is why ordinary people could feel the world was closed while learned circles still absorbed outside ideas. The emotional result was a strange mix of safety and pressure. Peace reduced the terror of civil war. But order came wrapped in hierarchy, monitoring, and the knowledge that one bad harvest could break a family. Festivals, bathhouses, theater, and cheap prints mattered partly because they gave people color inside a bounded life. Those pleasures were not minor. They were part of how people lived with the narrowness of the system. That is also why isolation should not be imagined as silence. It sounded like market noise, temple bells, official records, traveling processions, and gossip about prices. It smelled like bathhouses, miso, wood smoke, and crowded city streets. It looked lively on the surface and restrictive underneath. That layered feeling is the real everyday truth of Tokugawa life. The same country could therefore feel open and closed depending on where you stood. A Dutch text in scholarly hands meant filtered knowledge was entering. A checkpoint on a road meant ordinary movement was still tightly bounded. A crowded Edo bathhouse showed social energy, while a temple register showed official oversight. A merchant stall showed commercial growth, while a famine showed how fragile that growth could be. That mix of energy and control explains why the period feels so different from simple isolation myths. It was not empty. It was organized. It was not frozen. It was carefully channeled. And because almost every channel was watched, ordinary people learned to treat limits as normal life. That normalization of limits may be the deepest everyday meaning of Tokugawa isolation. For most people, the outside world was not absent so much as distant, filtered, and politically managed. What felt immediate was duty. What felt risky was stepping outside your assigned lane. That everyday narrowing is what gave isolation its real power. People learned to live creatively inside limits, but the limits still shaped every daily horizon they knew. So Tokugawa Japan was peaceful by Civil War standards, but never relaxed. It was orderly, but heavily watched. It was culturally rich, but socially narrow. It was improving in some places, but always one bad season away from crisis. Japan's long isolation was powerful because it controlled almost every important door, not because every single door was sealed. And for ordinary people, that felt less like dramatic silence from the outside world and more like living inside a carefully managed horizon.